Okay, let's jump right into this. Welcome back to The Explainer.
Look at a map of the world in 1914, and you won't see a neat grid of independent nation-states. Instead, you're looking at a globe dominated by just 6 massive, interconnected empires. These superpowers spent the late 19th and early 20th centuries expanding their borders and colliding in Africa and Asia. Those imperial rivalries drove heavy military spending, particularly an expensive race between Britain and Germany to build the world's most dominant navy. To protect all that territory, European leaders locked themselves into complex defensive pacts. By 1914, the continent was effectively split into 2 heavily armed camps, the Triple Entente of Britain, France, and Russia, facing off against the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. The most volatile pressure point on this map was southeastern Europe. In the Balkans, local nationalist movements were being squeezed between a rapidly expanding Austro-Hungarian Empire to the north and a slowly collapsing Ottoman Empire to the south. This setup meant the global map was practically wired with diplomatic explosives. Any localized border dispute or political crisis had the mathematical certainty of triggering those treaties and dragging every major power into a fight. On June 28, 1914, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, visited Sarajevo. While his motorcade drove through the city, a Bosnian Serb named Gavrilo Princip stepped up to the car and fired 2 fatal shots. In the chaotic aftermath of the shooting, Austria-Hungary blamed the Serbian government. They used the assassination as an excuse to deliver a harsh ultimatum, eventually declaring war and shelling the Serbian capital of Belgrade a month later. Within days, the alliance tripwires snapped into place. Russia mobilized its army to defend Serbia. Germany responded by declaring war on Russia and France. When German troops invaded neutral Belgium to reach the French border, Britain declared war on Germany. Within weeks, the world's largest empires marched their citizens into battle. The leadership in almost every capital shared a fatal, arrogant assumption. They all believed the fighting would be over in a matter of months. Germany's strategy, known as the Schlieffen Plan, relied on quickly capturing Paris before shifting its forces east to fight Russia. But French and British troops halted the German advance in September, condemning Berlin to a grueling war on 2 fronts. Unable to outflank each other, both sides dug in. By the end of 1914, a continuous, static line of fortified trenches stretched completely across Europe, from the English Channel all the way to the Swiss border. Millions of men were left huddled in the mud, exposed to disease and constant artillery fire. Because the belligerents were global empires, the fighting couldn't be contained to Europe. Britain, France, and Germany immediately began drafting millions of soldiers and laborers from their overseas colonies to support the war effort. The conflict spilled far beyond the trenches of France. Battles erupted across the deserts of the Middle East, the dense brush of East Africa, and the remote islands of the Asia-Pacific, pulling in troops from India, Australia, Senegal, and Canada. The sheer geographical footprint of these empires guaranteed that a regional dispute over influence in the Balkans would consume the entire planet, feeding millions of lives into a global meat grinder. Facing a complete tactical stalemate, military commanders were desperate to breach the enemy lines. They turned to their industrialized economies to invent new ways to kill. The battlefield quickly became a testing ground for 20th century technology. Armies deployed early combat aircraft, unleashed mechanized armor to roll over barbed wire, and pumped suffocating clouds of chlorine gas into enemy trenches. The violence also spread to the oceans. Britain used its massive navy to blockade German ports and starve the country of vital resources, while Germany deployed a fleet of U-boats to choke off global shipping, sinking merchant and passenger vessels alike. Generals were trying to execute 19th century cavalry charges and infantry sweeps against rapid-fire machine guns and heavy artillery. The result was massive, industrialized slaughter that failed to break the defensive deadlock. Funding and feeding this massive war machine drained national treasuries and hollowed out civilian populations. That intense domestic pressure eventually caused the imperial structures to crack. Under the cover of war, governments turned their weapons inward. the Ottoman Empire initiated a brutal campaign of ethnic cleansing against its own people, systematically murdering over 1 million Armenians, Greeks, and Assyrians. By 1917, crippling food shortages and millions of battlefield casualties pushed the Russian public to the breaking point. A massive revolution ousted the Tsar, eventually bringing the Bolsheviks to power and forcing Russia to sign a separate peace treaty with Germany. By late 1918, the Central Powers were disintegrating. The Austro-Hungarian Empire splintered as its various ethnic groups declared independence, and facing a naval mutiny at home, Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II was forced to abdicate his throne. 4 years inside an industrialized pressure cooker had completely exhausted the belligerent nations. The intense demands of total war shattered their social structures and collapsed the old world order from the inside out. When the armistice finally took effect on November 11, 1918, the human toll was almost impossible to comprehend. Between military and civilian casualties, an estimated 15 to 22 million people were dead. To make matters worse, the massive, cramped movement of troops across the globe accelerated a deadly outbreak of the Spanish flu. Striking populations already starving from naval blockades, the pandemic killed tens of millions more. In 1919, the victorious Allied powers gathered to sign the Treaty of Versailles. The agreements drafted there formally ended the conflict and marked the permanent collapse of the Russian, German, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman royal dynasties. The massive territories once controlled by those monarchs were carved up into independent countries. For the first time, modern nation-states like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia appeared on the map of Europe. But the peace was heavily flawed. By imposing crushing economic reparations on the defeated nations and failing to build a strong international coalition, the diplomats of 1919 left the underlying tensions unresolved. They planted the seeds for an even deadlier global conflict 20 years.
Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep analyzing the structures around you, and I will see you in the next one.